Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Uh, as you know, this is going to be our first formal lecture, and the topic of this lecture, the major topic, is introduction. But in this introduction, we are going to discuss four things. Number one is preliminary definitions. Number two, or B, is some advantages and disadvantages of machine translation. C is importance of machine translation, and D, some facts about machine translation. And we shall be discussing these facts in the shape of question answers. Before we start, I would like to give you an activity which spans between 5 to 7 minutes. The activity is that every individual in the class should think about machine translation, whatever perception, knowledge, or information you have about this technology, machine translation. You jot down these points on your notebook somewhere, and then you have a few minutes to discuss among yourself and exchange your perceptions, your information about machine translation. And when I say start, which means that you start your activity. Although I just stop for a second, but I would request that you also stop the video and then you restart your video, or you pause the video here and then you restart the video after maximum 5 minutes. So your time starts now. I hope the activity is clear. Well, I'm sure you have uh, enough points in your notebooks, or you have discussed uh, quite a good number of points among yourself, and that was the first step for this lecture. Now we can also discuss the definitions that we have in our book. Before I start the definition, or let me start the definitions actually. The earlier names of machine translations were mechanical translation or automatic translation. Machine translation basically is a computerized system. The key word here is computerized system, which are responsible for the production of translations from one natural language into another without human assistance. Natural language means the language used by humans. It is not artificial. It is not made by humans. It is used by humans, and they are born with the system which enables human brains to use natural language. Without human assistance, this clarification is very important because the ideal of machine translation is that there is a source text input from one side, and the result is the uh, target text output without human assistance. This is the ideal definition of machine translation, or ideal of machine translation. Human assistance, of course, is needed, but in developing programs and software for the production of translations. The central core of MT itself is the automation of the full translation process. As I said just now, that this is the core objective of machine translation, that automation of the full translation process. Machine translation should not be confused with computer aided or computer assisted translation, that is CAT tools, which covers both machine aided human translation and human aided machine translation. What do we mean by machine aided human translation? That is MAHT. We mean by machine aided human translation that the translation perhaps is done by the machine, and then uh, uh, I'm sorry, I correct my word. Uh, this is machine aided human translation, is that the translation basically is done by the human, and human gets assistance from various tools of machine translation or CAT tools. Whereas the human aided machine translation process is that the uh, the, uh, the translation basically is done by the machine, and then the corrections are made by the humans. The ideal of MT is to produce high quality translations, but in practice, as we see and we all know, it is also revised like human translation, which is post editing. This thing is linked with the previous idea. The types of errors produced by machine translation systems do differ from those of human translation. This point shall be discussed in detail when we have some examples in our hand, and we shall be knowing that the types of errors produced by machine translation systems are different from those that we make when we translate a text. The translation quality of machine translation systems can be improved by developing better methods, systems, or software, and by imposing certain restrictions on the input, that is the source text, which is known as pre-editing. And the examples, we have two examples here. One is input text, which is sub-language or controlled language. By sub-language or controlled language, we mean, for example, the sentences are short, or a legal text, or a text which is related to a specific area. When we say the legal text, it is not the matter of terminology. It is also the matter of the structure. Language structure is different from other text types. And also by producing interactive mode for machine translation. And by interactive mode, we mean that the software provides an interface where the translator can mm, provide some settings before translating any text. So, for example, a translator can give instructions for a certain type of terminology, that is text is related to that particular area. So the terminology should be taken from that database. Machine translation systems are bilingual and multilingual. Actually, nowadays, machine translation systems are mostly multilingual and not bilingual. Bilingual, we means two languages, and multilingual, of course, numerous. Uh, Google, of course, so far has 103 or perhaps more than 103 languages. Machine translation systems historically has been unidirectional, which means from one language to other, but not vice versa, and bi-directional. But nowadays, machine translation systems are, if I say, or all almost bi-directional, except for the very tiny, small, apps that people are developing nowadays, which are unidirectional. Unidirectional, for example, they only translate from English into Arabic and not from Arabic into English. Now we have the second point in this introduction is some advantages and disadvantages of MT, machine translation systems. Again, students, I'm going to give you the activity here, and I stop here, and you also pause the presentation here for 3 to 4 minutes. And the activity is, this is individual, this is not group. That every individual in the classroom should write some advantages that machine translation has, and some disadvantages that machine translation brings to the translators and translation industry, or in the area in general. Uh, Remember one thing: in such activities, I'm not asking uh, that you should know these things. I'm just uh, you know aspiring to generate some kind of raw thinking in your mind, because this raw thinking will also help you understand the subsequent points. So your time starts now, between 3 to 4 minutes, for writing down the advantages on one side and disadvantages of machine translation on the other side. So start. Well, keep your points, of course, with you. And when I come to your class on Tuesday, tomorrow, inshallah, uh, do share your points of this activity and the previous activity as well. But let's discuss quickly the advantages and disadvantages that have been included in this material that you have in your hand. Some of the advantages are machine translation is time saving. I think this doesn't need more clarification or explanation. Machine translation is cheap because free online. You don't have to pay money. Even PC version, machine translation software, PC versions are cheaper than the human translation. Uh, I'm not explaining this point here in this lecture because what I want you people from you people that you ask me about this the free online, or either if you of course understand this through the written material in your book, fine. But if you don't understand this, the free online, the difference between free online and PC version, and how are they cheap or cheaper than the human translation. Confidentiality is also very important when a text is given to human. Of course, you are trusting that human, or you are relying on that human translator, and maybe your documents are classified or they are confidential documents. So you are disclosing your confidentiality to some other people. Whereas the confidentiality is relatively better in machine translation. Of course, complete confidentiality is not ensured in machine translation systems, as you all can feel that, or at least you all can imagine that. Technology has its own hazards and problems, and the security issues are always there. But as for the human translation, the confidentiality issue is a little more risky. Machine translation provides, of course, a multi translation between multiple languages, whereas the human translator, I think, uh, one human can only translate maybe not more than between 4 to 5 languages, and this is the utmost. But machine translation systems can translate numerous between numerous languages, and this is very very important advantage for machine translation. The disadvantages, or some of the disadvantages, I must say, the accuracy issue. Of course, machine translation is good for gisting, what is called gisting, that you get the idea what has been said. You are not looking for the correct grammatical sentences or well punctuated text. You are just translating for the sake of getting the summary or getting a gist. But if you want a publishable text, you want to publish the text, of course, the human translation is much better than the machine translation. And when we give this statement, of course, we give this statement while we are talking about this machine translation right now in the beginning of 2020. And maybe after some years, the situation changes and everything becomes, uh, outdated. All these statements maybe do not stand true at that time. Contexts are not taken into account in machine translation. Of course, the brain of the machine is programmed and has a limitation and cannot see here and there, or cannot take into account the context in which the linguistic utterance took place, or the sentence was said or written, whereas the human brain can process the context as well and accordingly translate it. Ambiguity is the biggest issue in machine translation, because the machine translation is limited as for the ambiguity is concerned. And human, they know that one word has more than one meanings, and some words they have more than 10 meanings sometimes. The machine cannot recognize the different meanings, uh, whereas the human translators, they have this ability. With this, we can move on to the third aspect or topic, is importance of machine translation. I wanted to give you activity here, because it is very common sense that you also think about and write down some of the importance, some of the significant point that are fetched by machine translation systems, and write down them in your notebook. But I just skipped it because already I have given you two activity so far. So let's talk about some of the important aspects of machine translation in socio-political, in commercial, and in scientific arenas. The socio-political importance can be briefly discussed in these points. Is the communities where more than one language is spoken, we can call them the multilingual communities. As we have some cities, they are multilingual, and if in USA, New York is considered multilingual city where there are many languages are spoken. Take the example of Canada, where there are two parts. One is the French-speaking population, and the other one is the English-speaking population. And also, the new phenomena right now is the migration from poor countries to the developed countries, and they are also creating multilingual communities, multilingual, communities where they use more than one language. And this is very important. Actually, we in Pakistan, we should also know that we are multilingual community. We have, of course, a national language. We have our official language, which is English, but the national language is Urdu. And in addition to these two languages, we have also local languages, what are known as the local languages: Punjabi, Pashto, Balochi, so on and so forth. According to one study, there are more than 60 languages in Pakistan. So on the streets, especially the metropolitan cities like Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi, and even Peshawar, you see people on the streets and in the markets, they are using different languages. So the machine translation is very important for the societies, for the communities which are multilingual. There is another point which is related to the cultural human culture, is that if we want one language as a lingua franca, one language used for the whole nation, for the whole I mean the community, at the cost of other languages, we shall lose the language, and we shall lose the culture both. And this is of course very bad phenomenon. So to meet the needs of the multilingual societies and communities, machine translation is a good solution. I just mentioned Canada. We can also take into account the Switzerland, where there are French-speaking communities and their German-speaking communities are, and both languages are national languages. And of course, when they want to exchange, when they want to communicate with each other, they cannot rely on human translators alone, because this would take a lot of time. The solution is, or the importance of this is, the machine translation. So translation is necessary for communication, information, expressions, etc. in such societies. So in such societies, the translation volume or the work of translation is very huge, and human translation is naturally very slow. So solution is machine translation. From the socio-political aspects as well, communication among nations is very important. Countries, they want to communicate for various purposes. They want to know each other. They want to create a kind of understanding. They want to create good relationship, economic relationship, cultural relationship, and they want to learn from each other. And the only communication tool is translation, and the human translation, as we know all know, is very slow, cannot cope with the space or with the requirements or the need, and the solution comes from the machine translation. As for the commercial importance, I think we do not need to talk about the commercial importance. We all know that the translation itself is a commercially beneficial. If you are a good translator, for sure you will earn good money through your translation endeavors. Uh, a professional translator may translate 2,000 words per day. Machine translation enhances this in terms of time and lesser investment. This is the point. This enhances this in terms of time and lesser investment. This is the point which actually just I indicated previously as well. Because using the machine translation tools in your profession can of course decrease your cost, and with the lesser investment and with the lesser time you can produce very good amount of translation. 40 to 45% of the running costs of European community institutions are language costs. So we are not talking about only the European Parliament or European Union or European Council. We are just talking about European community institutions where there are a lot of institutions working for this European community together. So the 40 to 45% of the running cost of these institutions are language costs, where of course the main cost is spent on translation. Mind you, to my knowledge, so far in the European Union, there are more than 25 official languages. So we can imagine how much, and it's a huge amount of translations among these 25, more than 25 languages would be. The scientific importance of application and testing ground for many ideas in computer science, artificial intelligence, and linguistics. One very important thing is that the origin of Prolog, which was the first widely available logic programming language, which formed a key part of the Japanese fifth generation program of research in the late 1980s, can be found in the Q system. And the Q system language, which is computer language, originally developed for machine translation. The machine translation scientific importance is also can also be seen from another aspect, which is where the scientific texts are translated from one language into another, or at least CAD tools are used for the translation of the scientific text from one language into another one. With this, we can come to the fourth and the last point of introduction, which is some facts about machine translation. Here we have 7 questions in front of you. Number one, why is machine translation not perfect? I think we all agree on this point that the machine translation is not perfect all the time. So the question is why? Question number two is, what is machine translation used for and in which areas? Question number three, how does machine translation work? Question number four, what has to be considered before translation? Question number five, what kinds of translation programs are available? Question number six, what kind of translation program would be suitable? And seven, what is the difference between online, free or paid translators and PC version? There are simple questions. We can also ponder on the probable responses of those questions, and there are also some difficult questions. For example, number three, how does machine translation work is a technical question. So, what I want from you here, once again, that you have 7 to 10 minutes for this activity. And the activity is that you choose one, two, or three, or maybe more than three questions, or at least uh, uh, you select two of these questions which are easier for you. Think about them and write down the probable answers. Why is machine translation not perfect, in your opinion? And also, uh, you know, this the second question: what is machine translation used for, and in which areas? And maybe you can also think about what is the difference between online free paid translators and PC version, if possible for you. Once again, as I said earlier, I do not want that you should have knowledge right now. What I want that you should use your thinking, your brain, and use your common sense to find out your own answers to some of these questions. So the activity, think about one, two, three maximum, more than three maybe possible within the given limit time, and write down your answers in a simple language in your notebook, and then you should have few minutes to discuss them among yourself. And that discussion should be like that. After discussion, either you increase your point already written point in your notebook, or you delete some of the points uh, in your notebook, or wherever you are writing. So I would like to hear from you people when we meet the output or the fruit of this activity. So start your activity right now. Okay. I hope you have done a good activity, and I shall be seeing the result of that activity. Uh, but we come back to these questions once again. We start scanning the answers that we have in our book. Why is machine translation not perfect? Uh, the 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 one of the reasons, which is the biggest one, is the difference between software functioning of software and function of human brain. The software is always limited, programmed, told to do certain things, whereas the human brain is not limited. It generates ideas, new ideas. Human brain is creative. Human brain changes with the passage of time. The human mind and brain actually changes, of course, enlarges, and the everything is changing, as we can see in our own personal experience as well. Whereas the software works on the basis of ones and zeros, uh, which is which is very fine, which is very good, but which is limited. So working of brain and the working of software, these are two major differences which can be a good answer to this question. The second question is, what is machine translation used for, and in which areas? It's a little bit practical question. Uh, we can have these answers coming from the experts. The large volumes of text. If we have large volumes of text, and we wanted to translate them quickly, their machine translation is the most suitable solution. Text needed to be understood quickly. We are not looking for the correctly grammatical sentences or translation. We just want to know the gist of, or the summary of the text. On emails, online chats, of course, where we are not we are not looking for the quality of translation. We are just looking to understand what is being said or what is being written. In faster business correspondence, machine translation is the solution, or is the best for that purpose. companies with business partners. If a company working in China and they have business partner in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, or other countries like Philippines or Thailand or other countries, so that means they are their businesses is function in three four languages. So and their purpose is just to communicate and get what is, because the basics are clear, but the day-to-day functioning, for the communication of day-to-day functioning, they can use machine translation systems effectively. Question number three: how does machine translation work? And here we have a very quick and non-technical rule-based description. Remember the term rule-based description, because the when we discuss the methods of developing machine translation, we shall be discussing this rule-based method. But this is here to answer this question, the partial answer, not the complete answer. We can take this image in our brain. There is a source language and target language feeding. On one side, of course, source language, all the linguistic information related to source language, all the linguistic information related to target language, and they are fed into the system. And then the software function. The software is prepared for the functioning of the source language information and target language information. It's just like creating a brain of a machine translation. After this, the process is of two phases. Number one is a lexical transfer, where each word is translated from the source language into the target language. And in the second phase, the structuring of these words are made through, of course, the software functioning. And the result is translation. Remember, as I said, and as it is written on the page as well, this is a non-technical description and only a description based on rule-based machine translation method. Question number four asks what has to be considered before translation. Uh, Number one, whether the source text is grammatically correct, should be correct text. Number two, the slang expressions or typographical mistakes or missing punctuations should be updated. I mean, the slang expressions should be deleted, typographical mistakes should be corrected, and the punctuation should be updated in the source text. And also, the complex or too long sentences should be made simple. Uh, it is point here is we need a quality translation, so it is called uh, pre-editing. We pre-edit the text, I mean they edit the text before translation, and then the selection of suited software or suitable software to the source text. This is a little bit technical thing point, which is suitable software for the text, because right now in the market or in the industry, there are various kinds of solutions for various kinds of the text. Uh, for the technical text, there are software for the scientific text, of course, for the literary text, for tourism text, for legal text, for medical text, and so on, so forth. So selection of a suitable software is also it should be one of the considerations. Question number five is what kinds of translation programs are available? Again, here we are not taking the answer of this question comprehensively, because we cannot take at this stage. Since this is a part of an introduction, we are just getting the introduction. So we can talk about these things. Digital online dictionaries is one part of machine translation. Word for word translation programs, where these programs only provide the word for word translation, and then comes the role of the translator to restructure these words according to the grammatical requirements of the target language. And then we have sentence for sentence translators, full text translators are also available for getting translation from machine. Number six, What kind of translation program would be suitable? Of course, the question is very, very generic question and can be answered from different aspects. But we keep in our mind the basic things. The translation program, which is easy to handle. Google, I think, is very easy to handle. But there are PC version program which are not easy to handle. Feature of adding new words, terminology, proper names. Also, in that program, there should be features for adding new words, your own vocabulary, and the terminology that you know, and you add them for your subsequent use, and also the proper names and terminology import. The software which facilitates the facilitate importing the terminology from the database. Setting specialist areas, for example, banking, engineering, medicine, in your own program, in your own software. And translation memory should also be available in the program and the product that you are using. And Microsoft Word integration is another um, thing which should be, because which Microsoft Word caters for almost all the other platforms and types of programs. So you should keep this in your mind as a translator and user of machine translation facilities. With this, we come to the last question, which is what is the difference between online and free/paid translators and PC version. First, talk about the online translators. Internet and browsers are used for the text, of course. Simple. For the online translators, I think we can keep in our mind the Google, the best example. Text is entered or typed using the clipboard function. Text formats are not taken into consideration. Whatever format, whatever font type, size, bold, not bold, etc. These things are not important in online translators. You just copy them and paste them in the software and get your translation, regardless of the quality. The advantages of this kind is operation is very easy. Just copy and paste and get the translation. Copy the translation and paste in your document. Finished. And no training is required, of course. The only thing is that you know how to, of course, use your internet, how to open Google Translate, and how to copy and paste, and how to then copy and paste back into your document. So no training required. Need not to bother about linguistic details, of course, in this case. Even you don't need to know other languages, of course. You just need to know this one. Only pay for the internet connection if you have internet connection, so you can get the translation through these online translators. There are disadvantages, of course. No extensions can be made. Extensions for terminology, extensions for memory, extensions for your own vocabulary that you have used, and also the other features which are reflected through extensions. No user specific settings for translation options. For example, choosing between American English and British English, or Saudi English, or Saudi Arabic and Egyptian Arabic, and so on, so forth. So user specific settings are not available in such programs. Quality can suffer as a result, of course. We all know that in such the translations or through such online translators, the question of quality actually is marginalized or minimized, and we do not look for the quality, because after getting the translation from such sources, the translators, they have to work for many things, of course, for the sentence structure, for some lexical items, for terminology, for punctuation, for many things, maybe some typographical mistakes and some proper names, and so on, so forth. Translation produced by free services is often limited to a certain number of characters. I think they have limitation. Of course, you cannot translate the whole book in one go. You have to select some pages and put them in, and then get the translation, and then the next, and so on and so forth. And another disadvantage of such programs is secrecy and confidentiality at stake, because when you put the text there, and if your text is a little bit, very dear to you, is confidential for you or for your institution, of course, you are, of course, taking this risk. Although you are getting the translation free of cost, but the other cost is that you are taking, you are disclosing your confidential documents to the server, which may not be used for any person, but the possibility remains that maybe someone sometime retrieve all these confidential documents of yours, your institutions, and use them against you. Well, PC versions have their own user interface. The example of PC versions, actually, basically, you have to buy them. They are not free of cost, so can mostly directly be integrated in the text processing program. I just mentioned one example of PC version is SDL Trados, is the famous one of the famous PC version machine translation platform, which of course you install in your computer, but it is mainly connected to the main server, which is owned by the company. Users can work in their usual text processing environment, mostly Microsoft Word or other environment that they are using for their jobs. There are many advantages. These programs can be extended with your own vocabulary and specialist dictionaries. The more you translate, the more you build that PC version for your own future use. Improved quality of translation is another advantage. Offer individual adjustment possibilities. You can adjust that interface for your own ease, for your own objectives, the objectives of the text that you are translating. Secrecy and confidentiality in such PC version machine translation programs is or ensured, for sure ensured, because your information are not shared to anyone. They are not, of course, transferred to anyone. There are also disadvantages. Linguistic knowledge, maybe it's not, maybe it is necessary, it's required. Not only linguistic knowledge is required, means the translation knowledge is required, but also the technical training is also needed to run these software effectively. So, my dear students, with this we have finished our talk about the introduction of this course. Uh, your next, what we call the advanced reading assignment, is that you people, and if you have book, take note of the page number. You are supposed to read from page number, which are written, handwritten, and the topic, page number 9, from page number 9, which is the brief history of machine translation, till page number 11. So we have here, we shall be scanning quickly history of machine translation and the developments that took place during this very short but very significant history of machine translation. With this, thank you very much for being with me, and I hope we shall be talking more about some of the points. Of course, your questions are the most central point when we meet on Tuesday. Take very good care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.